Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Live from the Heartland show. From Chicago, it's Michael James. That's me. I'm glad to be here. It's for the week of April 29th. We're recording it on the 26th. And this is actually number 150 of Heartland at Home since the beginning of the pandemic. Just so people are aware of the pandemic still, I just found some information that says 1,100 people a week are dying from COVID. So it's still with us, and be careful. This week, our guests are going to be Mike Klonsky, who does his own show called Hitting Left on a sister station, Lumpin' Radio. And it's always good to talk to Mike, and we're going to talk politics from local to global. And then a little bit later on, we're going to have the renowned blues harmonica player, the one and only Billy Branch. So stick around here for the next hour, wherever you're getting the show, on the radio, on the air, stream, YouTube, or CAN TV or podcasts. Let's start off a little bit with a sad thing that happened. Although he lived a very long and productive and wonderful life, it's the one and only Harry Belafonte, who passed away on Tuesday in New York City. He was 96 years old, and I think his daughter said that his cause of death was congestive heart failure. Belafonte was someone who came around in the 50s. He sang, some tunes. He was on TV. He was in movies. And then he became an ongoing, long-time, big-time civil rights activist. I do have one little kind of personal story. My cousin through marriage, Pam, out in Missouri, put a little thing up on the email yesterday to our family Zoom, thanking her stepdad, David, my uncle, for getting my father, who was producing a play called Hallelujah Baby at the time on Broadway, got Harry Belafonte to dance with Pam during the after party of opening night. So, Pam, thanks for bringing that up. And Harry Belafonte, thanks for all you did. On a kind of a negative note, some of you will recall that we reported on a protest going on in Atlanta, protracted struggle, actually, over Cop City, which is a $90 million new training center they're planning to build. And one demonstrator had been killed there. And most recently, Atlanta has shut down the park where the Cop City protest movement is taking place. So we'll keep you posted on that. It's not a good situation. Remember, here in Chicago, we had a big building of a new police training academy. Wasn't very popular with some people. Here in Chicago, Kim Foxx, who I've got to say has been, I think, a very good state's attorney, she announced that she is not going to run for re-election. She's been under a lot of attack for being more like a public defender than a prosecutor, but I think she has kind of worked out a pretty good system, and we've had some good results. And obviously, people make mistakes, but we're real grateful for her service, and it's going to get very interesting to see who will take her place. On the labor front, our neighbors to the north up in Canada, a third to a half of the federal workers are out on strike. And I learned today through Payday, which is a site I go to, that the ticket takers and vendors at the Pirates Stadium, that's the Pittsburgh Pirates baseball team, have settled their strike. Not a lot of money, but it's closer to the $15 an hour they were asking for. And also out of state in New Jersey over at Rutgers, where the teaching assistants, et cetera, settled. There's some talk that maybe that strike will get reopened. Let's hope not. In D.C., coming up, something you got to all watch. McCarthy, the Speaker of the House, the Republican who kind of is a front for Trump, he is about to face some real struggle. He's been sticking to partisan bills, getting the Republicans to vote lockstep together. But the vote to raise the debt limit, he wants, big spending cuts. And Biden has been pretty firm. He's not about to do that. So we're going to have to watch that one. It's coming up. It'll affect all of us, particularly those of us who get Social Security checks. So hopefully they come to some terms. Tucker Carlson, who has emerged as one of the most negative mouthpieces ever, very negative guy, and pretty much an opportunist because he played it out of other sides of his mouth at different times in his career. He got fired by Fox News the other day. Also fired, and not my favorite guy, was Don Lemon over at CNN. And someone who is not getting a contract renewed is Nate Silver. He did a lot of baseball and predictions on sports, but then he started doing stuff around elections, and he's been very good at it. I think he's optimistic that something good will come, and he'll get a new contract and be hosted somewhere else. On the gun front, it's ongoing in the United States with guns, but 10 states have really made steps to ban assault weapons. And most recently, Washington State Governor Jay Inslee, who was a candidate for president last time, and he's a pretty interesting guy, the state, and he signed it, has banned sales of assault weapons, including the AR-15, which has been used in some of those deadliest mass shootings in our country. Washington joins California, my home state of Connecticut, Delaware, ancestral homelands, Hawaii, Illinois, home base, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Jersey, and New York, and Washington, D.C. That list is growing. We'll see how fast it grows because it is a signature issue of our time. I want people to take note. We've had a lot of grumbling about Senator Joe Manchin, a Democrat, but not always voting with the Democrats. In his home state of West Virginia, one of the poorest states in the country, which has pretty conservative kind of leadership, the West Virginia governor, Jim Justice, is expected to announce a Senate bid against Joe Manchin. That's rough on who we should root for. I always think that Manchin could be a lot better. Also, take note of this. The U.S. Supreme Court, John Roberts, has refused to testify before the Senate's over ethics row, and the Democrats are condemning that. Let's move on to a little bit of sports. So the Cubs are doing pretty well. The Sox are just having a miserable time of it. The Bears are still planning to move. I always thought they could move down toward the old steel mills, be in Chicago. The name would be in sync with the city. It's not looking that really good. The Bears are also about to have a draft. There's a lot of news about that. We've got these NASCAR races going to happen downtown. I'm still trying to find out what led outgoing Mayor Lori Lightfoot to bring in NASCAR races and disrupt a lot of summer activities downtown. Also on sports, the U.S. long jumper Tara Davis Woodhull has been stripped of national title after a positive cannabis test. Davis Woodhull has already served the suspension, started on March 21st. It was said that she was issued a reduced suspension at the minimum allowed by the rules because her use of cannabis was not competition related, and she completed a substance abuse program. Adding to that, as a reefer report, take note, there is a ganja glut. There have been a lot of reports in the papers. It's an excess of weed, and growers in states like California, Oregon, Washington are seeking to expand internet sales. We'll see how that plays out, but there's a lot of weed out there and a lot of people growing it, thinking that they're going to make big money, and there's a lot of regulation, and there's a few hitches in the whole deal. Regularly, we get information from politicians, organizations, et cetera. We try to share which is worthy of your attention. And our Congresswoman from the 9th Congressional District here in Illinois, Jan Schakowsky, this week said she's calling for fair wages and workplace protection for workers. Workers deserve a fair wage and workplace protection, period. On Monday, she stood with one fair wage and tipped workers here in Chicago down at City Hall. At the richest time in history, there is no reason all workers cannot make a living wage. Number two, she met with Colombian president, the newly elected progressive to the left president, Gustavo Petro. And then she says progressive leaders around the world are working towards real change. It was an honor to meet with Colombian President Gustavo Petro to discuss our shared goals of protecting our environment and reducing inequities. In the U.S., the three richest Americans have more wealth than the bottom 50%. That's for real, and that's got to change. Jan has also become a champion of swimmers. You recall that we talked about she got funding to rebuild the High Ridge YMCA and their swimming pool. Well, this one, she now has secured $2 million for the Broadway Armory Natatorium. That's over on Broadway, a little bit south of where we're doing this show from. She says, thanks to community project funding, I secured $2 million to help build the Broadway Armory's new swimming pool. The Broadway Armory is already a beloved community space, but I cannot wait to see residents, young and old, flock to the pool for swim lessons, water aerobics, and so much more. And Jan also has agreed to come on the show, so we're going to do that real soon. And she also let us know again that public comment period runs through this Sunday regarding changes to our shoreline. So if you want to comment on that, you want to go to Chicago Shoreline at usace.army.mil. Last week, we had Jamie O'Reilly on talking about her singing and historical projects, and we had Orrin Williams talking community agriculture, and you can get both of those if you go to youtube.com/heartlandmedia/videos, and you can also get them at Spotify and Google Podcasts. Once again, Harry Belafonte has passed. We're going to play a tune, one of Harry Belafonte's tunes, before we bring on our next guest, which will be the one and only Mike Klonsky. Stay tuned here on the left end of your dial. We're back with more Live from the Heartland for the week of April 29th. I'm Michael James here in Chicago. And as usual, whenever I have this young fellow on the show, it's a great pleasure to bring on the one and only Mike Klonsky, host of Hitting Left with the Klonsky Brothers. Does a lot of other stuff. How are you today, Mike?
I'm great, Michael. Thank you.
Have you been in the cold yet today in Florida?
Well, you know, we're not really on vacation down here. We're down here taking care of my wife Susan's father, who's 99, and who he fell and broke his hip, which for a lot of people that's a death warrant, you know.
That's the end.
But yeah, so we're trying to get him up walking again, and he has. He's making great progress, so we're very happy about that.
Well, as an old guy myself, not quite that old, I'm really glad to hear that there is potential for recovery.
Right.
Things come down.
You yourself have been through it a couple times.
A couple of times. You know, Mike, as you know, I teach at DePaul and a class on activism. And one of the things that we do in that class is we bring in people who are involved in the struggle in various ways, many people that you know. And they kind of will tell us what they did, but also kind of talk about their life, where they came from, how they got involved, and what they've done. And I'm trying to build that theme into the show here, too, that bringing on progressive folks that I know, and I know the great work they've done, and just to have them talk a little bit about how they got into being in the movement, an organizer, an activist, and a few of the things they've done. And then we're going to whip right on to world affairs, local stuff, Florida Report, et cetera, et cetera. So fill us in on yourself, brother. A little auto.
I'm getting old. I don't know if I can hold up under all that questioning, but I'll try. I am a longtime activist. I consider myself a radical activist, and my activities go back really to the 60s. Mid 60s, really. And I've been involved in struggles around, against war, for social justice. I've been a union organizer. I've been a community organizer. I've traveled around the world looking at world revolutions and trying to be a witness of them and document them and look at their meeting with revolutionary leaders. And anyway, I've done, like you, Michael, I've done a lot of stuff. One thing that I've been involved in all that time, as you have, has been trying to develop alternative media, whether it be like the way we did it back in the day, where we had underground newspapers. I remember the first time I met you, you were talking a paper called The Movement.
Yeah, that was in L.A. We were on, Terry Cannon was the editor. Joe Blum was the associate editor. I was a Chicago correspondent, and we took a tour, which I won't go into the details, but you were one of the first stops, on the West Coast. We had made it all the way over to Mississippi, Louisiana, up to Chicago. But
at that time, myself and a group that later became the SDS chapter, Students for Democratic Society chapter in Southern California, we were doing draft resistance work out of a draft resistance office in LA. And that's why I remember you stopping by, and we were counseling young people on how to avoid the draft. We were running people up to Canada, doing disrupting draft boards, doing all kind of crazy stuff. And then in 1967, I traveled to Michigan and went to my first SDS convention. And it's a funny thing, as we were leaving the convention, a young woman asked if she could hitch a ride with us. We drove from LA to Chicago and back. I mean, from LA to Michigan and back. And she said, can I hitch a ride with you back to LA? She says, the National Office of SDS is sending a group of us out there to help you get organized and to become part of the SDS national scene. And it turned out to be a woman I would later marry, Susan Ennett.
Oh, I didn't know this story.
Yeah. And so, she was very sick at that time. She had the flu or something like that. So the three of me and Paul, the late Paul and Joby Shinoff, who drove together, we stuck her in the back seat, and the three of us rode together in the front seat all the way to LA because we didn't want to be near her because she was coughing and sneezing. And anyway, to make a long story short, we got to LA, and the next thing I know, she had moved in to my place. And now next week, or actually May 12th, 55 years later, we celebrate our anniversary.
And you're down there together helping with her dad.
We're down here together helping with her dad. And when you say, how did you get involved in the movement? Well, the way I got involved in SDS was by Susan. She recruited us. She was actually helping to raise money for us for our draft resistance project. It's something called Vietnam Summer. She was one of the coordinators of it. And so I had talked to her on the phone several times, but never met her. And then I finally met her at the convention, and she came out to LA, and a whole group of them came out. Carl Davidson, a bunch of people from the what we call the NO, then the National Office.
National Office.
Yeah. And then the next year, I went back to the SDS convention in '68 and got elected to become the national secretary of SDS. And then Susan and I packed up everything we had, moved back to Chicago, moved into an apartment in the West Side, which was burning down at the time after Dr. King was assassinated. And there's a lot to this story that we don't have time to get into.
Yeah, you've been doing a lot of stuff. I'm glad you came back to Chicago. You were on, you were the national secretary of SDS. I was on the National Interim Committee. I think 3 times I was elected to that. And the other thing was that I'm just going to mention, you and I went on a trip with Athletes United for Peace to the Soviet Union. And we played baseball in Donetsk, in Leningrad. We went to Sochi. We had a good time. We'll save that for another time.
We went to Ukraine and Russia. Yeah.
Yeah. It wasn't a separate country then, but let's move to Ukraine. That's what got me going and getting a hold of you about coming on. What's your take on the Ukraine? I heard a very interesting report yesterday on NPR. Lula, the newly reelected after some time out of office, president of Brazil.
Went to China, you're talking about.
Went to China, but they also talked about negotiations and how to handle Ukraine. Why don't you talk about Ukraine and NATO, et cetera? What's at stake? What's going on? Because a lot of us are all for Ukraine, but it's a complicated story.
Very good point, Michael. It's a complicated story, and it's not just a matter of cheerleading one side or the other. The origins of this go way back before the Russian invasion in February of last year. There was actually a U.S.-backed coup d'état which overthrew the president of Ukraine in 2014, and there's been fighting going on, especially in the Donbass region and in the southeast of Ukraine ever since, as there's a separatist movement Russian-speaking people in that part of the country who want to affiliate or, want to be part of the Soviet Union, of Russia, the former Soviet Union. Russia has dreams of reconstituting the former Soviet Union, which when we went to Russia to play baseball, the Soviet Union was collapsing. It was in the process of falling apart, and it ultimately did. And so the countries that were a part of what some people call a prison house of nations within the USSR declared their independence and tried to, move out of the Soviet orbit. Anyway, I don't want to get too far into that, but finally, last year, the Russians, who were worried about NATO advances in Europe, including recruiting Ukraine into NATO, as well as Finland, another country that borders on Russia, they launched what they would, it was kind of a preemptive invasion, horrible invasion, which led to tremendous devastation, loss of life, uprooted millions of Ukrainians from their home, scattered them all over the world. And then the U.S. saw an opportunity to move in and start arming the Ukrainian army. And the struggle, in my view, moved from strictly an independence movement to free Ukraine from Russian domination into a proxy war between the two big powers, U.S. and Russia. And we've seen that happen all over the globe. We've seen battles between imperialist rivals. That's how really the First World War and the Second World War began. And this could possibly be the way the Third World War begins. And this World War, if it's allowed to spread beyond the borders of Ukraine, could easily turn into a world war and a nuclear conflagration, which could devastate the whole globe.
Yeah, one of the things that I heard was Finland was accepted for NATO membership, I believe, and
yes.
Ukraine is still trying to be accepted. But one of the things that the Russians are concerned about is you would have NATO right up against, like on a 1,500-mile border against the Soviet Union, against Russia. Keep calling it the wrong thing. And
be like Canada.
What about NATO?
It'd be like Canada and Mexico and the Caribbean joining the Russian Federation or the Russian military alliance. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one of the other things going on, though, is just an awareness now that the United States, along a superpower, but only like about 4% of the world's population, I think. I used to talk about someday the United States will be viewed in the world community as a country that worked for the good of the whole. Now, that would be great. Right now, there's a lot of other countries who feel they don't have a say. That would include South Africa, Brazil, India. They don't have permanent seats on the UN the way the United States, Russia, and China do, and France and England. So while some people are calling for what I think they call a multipolarity world, where a lot of people get to share in being dominant, versus a U.S.-controlled dominance of the world. Any take on any of that?
Well, yeah. I mean, I guess I'm one of those people. I've always been against imperialism, especially the imperialism of our own country. It's thirst to expand and dominate other countries, which have led to one war after another. And rather than have a policy of cooperation with other countries, rather than have especially in times of crisis, like the COVID pandemic, this was an opportunity where the European powers, China, the U.S., Russia, everybody should have been cooperating, trying to fight a common foe, which was the pandemic. And instead, you had this vaccine imperialism and the unnecessary deaths of millions of people. And we have to understand that imperialism is a system. It's a global system of competition, based on competition and rivalry. It starts out with economic expansion and economic rivalry, but it inevitably leads to war if it's not constrained or not controlled. So right now, you have this unwinnable proxy war going on in Ukraine, which is affecting the global economy. Terrible inflation around the world. The prices of food and energy are out of reach for many people. And many countries, regardless of their political, system or whatever, are demanding an end to the war and demanding immediate negotiations between the conflicting powers, and not just countries, but international figures like the Pope, like the UN, the head of the UN, Mr. Gutierrez. They're all saying we need to stop the fighting now. You have to understand that while the U.S. is supplying weapons to Ukraine, all the missiles that are being fired, all the bombs that are exploding, are all falling on Ukrainian. They're all killing Ukrainians and Russian workers who've been drafted or conscripted into the war. And so this is not a war similar to World War I, a terrible imperialist war now. And it calls for everybody to put pressure on our own government here and demand an end to that war and an end to U.S. kind of stoking the fires of war by just pouring tons of missiles and billions of dollars in military support, and to push for a negotiated settlement.
Oh, that would be great. I'm remembering the Vietnam War, where most of the people in the country were for the war. By the end of the war, most of the people were against it. And then the next thing, when we had all this stuff going on in Iran, everyone was for war again. It's like the populace of the United States goes back and forth. But I think in this case, a lot of people don't have the scoop, the real information on this. I mean, I don't want to come off like I'm rooting for Russia, because I definitely am for the people of Ukraine, but it is a little bit complicated. And people need to know more.
That's complicated, but our demand is simple. We're against war and we're for peace. Right. And you can't have peace without justice. And so we're for justice. And how justice can be worked out in that situation should be a product of the negotiations. And right now, countries like China have a proposal for peace. And in fact, President Zelensky of Ukraine has shown an interest in that proposal. And they recently, President Xi of China and Zelensky of Ukraine have had a meeting via phone the other day. And Zelensky sounded very favorable. He said, in fact, in his words, he said that the call with Xi served as a powerful impetus to their bilateral relationship. And he said, I had a long and meaningful phone call with Chinese President Xi Jinping. And I believe that this call, as well as the appointment of Ukraine's ambassador to China, will give powerful impetus to the development of bilateral relations. And especially, he saw that it could help in terms of ending the war. So that's encouraging. That's a big shift. And I'm sure it has Biden and Secretary Blinken and other cold warriors here in the United States worried to death that China is going to get the credit for a negotiated peace in Ukraine.
Well, yeah, and as we said at the outset, Lula went and met with Xi, and the U.S. then upped the amount of money that we just gave to Brazil for the rainforest. So there's a lot of stuff going on. People working, trying to work.
The U.S. is putting tremendous pressure on Lula.
They are.
The newly elected president of Brazil, a revolutionary leader in Brazil, who helped topple the fascist regime that ran the country before. the countries of what we used to call the third world or the non-aligned movement are all basically coming out and following Lula's lead and calling for a peaceful settlement, because their countries are bearing the brunt of a lot of this, the fighting. The fighting has disrupted, for example, the flow of wheat and energy from that part of the world. Ukraine is the breadbasket of the world, really. And when those shipments stopped because of the war, it led to starvation in many countries in Africa. So this war is already kind of has global implications, and it's not just
I was saying the Ukraine farmers aren't getting money for their grain; they're sitting on last year's crops. So anyhow, let's switch. We only got a couple minutes left, but you're in Florida, and one of the most negative politicians out there is the governor of Florida, and he's in a battle going on with Disney. Oh, it's a little complicated, but Disney is suing the governor of Florida. Give us a quick Florida report.
We came down to Florida. My wife and I came down to Florida, as I said, to try to deal with some family health issues. We had to postpone our flight 3 times because of the weather in Fort Lauderdale. They called it the flood of the century, or 1,000-year flood even. And I don't know if you saw the videos. There were people swimming down Broward Boulevard, and the runways at Fort Lauderdale Airport were underwater, under 2 feet of water. Finally, they opened up one, and on Friday we were able to fly in. And so here's now they've pretty much cleaned up the mess. But one story that won't go away is that DeSantis, or as we call him, DeFascist.
That's good.
He fled Florida
to Iowa
in the wake of the storm, and went on a presidential campaign tour and book tour in Iowa and Ohio, and then hopped on a flight to Tokyo, and he's on a world tour now, visiting Tokyo and South Korea and Israel, and campaigning like crazy. But he's abandoned the thousands of people here in this part of Florida who lost everything in the floods. And so people are really pissed at Governor DeSantis, who looked like he was going to be the main rival of Trump in the presidential primary, the Republican presidential primary. For a while, he was looking like a sane, rational, right-wing alternative to Trump. But now his numbers are in the toilet, largely because of this situation. And Trump is rubbing his hands together with glee, attacking DeSantis. And so are the Democrats. And the Democrats, are jumping for joy over this turn of events.
They need to jump for joy because they haven't done very well down there for a while.
Oh, well, no kidding. And the thing is that I was just reading, only 6% of voters in the United States want to see an election in 2024 between Biden and Trump. That's not who people want to see running against each other in 2 years. But despite that, it looks very much like they will be the candidates. So that's a statement on democracy, American democracy, really, to me. The people, the great majority of people don't want Biden or Trump running. And yet Biden announced yesterday that he's going to be the candidate. And it doesn't look like there's even going to be a primary. It means anything. In fact, Bernie Sanders announced today that he's not running.
He's supporting Biden.
Yeah, he's supporting Biden. So the thing that troubles me the most, Michael, as a progressive, as a leftist, is that it looks like the left presence within the Democratic Party, which was kind of strong 4 years ago, with the squad and with Bernie running as a strong opposition candidate, we were able to get things in the platform and win certain gains. It now looks like that faction has collapsed. And I really worry about that. The left needs to have an independent voice, an independent presence in American politics. And if we can't have our own party, we should be able to have a strong presence within the Democratic Party. And that's why I started out talking about independent media. That's an important part of it. And that's why it's so important that what you're doing with Live from the Heartland and what I'm trying to do with Hitting Left and with my writings on Substack and other places, and what other people are doing as well, I mean, in their podcasts and TV and radio programs, is to establish a strong independent base in which political organizing can take place around us. It can provide a scaffold or a structure for that to go on. And right now I'm worried about that kind of being crushed. And so when you were asking what are progressives to do right now, I think that should be a clue. We need to develop our strong, united, independent presence. And here in Chicago, that's going to be a tough road to hoe because of all the infighting that's taken place during the last two mayoral elections. But that's getting into a whole other topic.
Yeah, so we're going to have you back. Like I said before we even started, that rather than go too long, we're going to, because I do have another guest coming on, we're going to have you regularly, which we already do. So, Mike, you have a great time down in Florida. I give my best to your father-in-law, to your wife, anyone else I know down there. And
thank you, Michael.
People can tune you in on Fridays at
11 to noon, WLPN, 105.5 FM on your radio dial in Chicago, and streaming live on lumpinradio.com.
All right, Klonsky, you're a hell of a guy. I always like talking to you. One thing we didn't talk about was Kim Foxx.
Your listeners can follow me at substack.com, and I'll be writing about the Kim Foxx situation there.
Well, send me a copy, brother, and we'll see.
Okay, brother. Take care.
All right, we'll be right back with Live from the Heartland. Don't go too far from the left end of your dial or from CAN TV or wherever you're getting the show. We'll be right back with our next guest. Hey, welcome back to Live from the Heartland for the week of April 29th. And I'm Michael James. And it really gives me a lot of pleasure to bring on one of Chicago's premier bluesmen, musician, Billy Branch, the one and only. How are you, Billy?
I'm great, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you for asking. It's always good to know people are doing great. Why don't we start off by letting our viewers and our listeners know a little bit about you. Some of them know you, I'm sure. Some don't. So tell us where you come from, how you got to Chicago, how you found the blues, etc.
Well, I was born in Chicago, raised in Los Angeles. I returned to Chicago in 1969 to attend University of Illinois, Chicago Circle campus, where I graduated with a BA in political science. During that time, actually before I entered the university, on a fateful summer afternoon, the date was August 30th, 1969. I heard the first live blues in my entire life. And I had taught myself as a youngster to play harmonica. I played folk songs and Christmas carols. And when that harmonica wore out, I bought it at a Woolworths at about age 11. When it wore out, I'd go buy another one. So when I came back home, the sweet home Chicago, I still had a harmonica. I go down to this festival and I witnessed what was arguably the greatest blues festival ever produced in history. Excuse me. I'll name you some of the headliners: Coco Taylor, Buddy Guy, Junior Wells, Betty Everett, Big Mama Thornton, Bo Diddley, Muddy Waters, Big Walter Horton, Mighty Joe Young. There was like about 40 legendary names, and it was produced, and the backing band was by Willie Dixon and the Chicago All-Stars.
Right.
And this was the very first day I'd ever heard live blues in my entire existence. And I'm going to condense this to show you what an effect it had on me. And 7 years later, I was Willie Dixon's harmonica player.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
69, yeah, I was long before that. I'm an older guy. I think I was going to the Blue Flame at 39th and Drexel and seeing Paul Butterfield with Howlin' Wolf's old band. And, there's just been some great music in this town, but you named a bunch of people who I saw, some of them in Chicago, some at the Ann Arbor Blues and Jazz Festival.
Yeah.
Big Mama Thornton I saw during an Alan Freed rock and roll show, I think, at the Lowe's State or Brooklyn Paramount, New York. Anyhow, so how long were you with Willie Dixon?
6 years.
And what kind of mark did that leave on your life? How did that influence you?
It was an indelible mark. I'm regarded as one of the pioneers of the blues in schools movement, which I've been actively engaged in since 1978. As a matter of fact, I have an ongoing program currently on the West Side at Legal Prep High School with to Willie. My mentor is Sterling Plump, Dr. Sterling Plump, professor. He was one of my professors at University of Illinois, and he is the blues poet. He has, I think, how many books? 17, 18 books of poetry, all blues themed, some of them dedicated to blues artists. He's written several poems about me that were published. But Sterling said he's followed my whole career, because when I was in his class, I wasn't even in a blues band. I was far from it. And he says, when he saw me return from touring with Willie Dixon, musically, I was unrecognizable. The transformation was that profound. I learned so much. I replaced the late, great Carrie Bell. And Carrie Bell, because his son, Lurie, was the founding member of our group, which I still maintain the name, the Sons of Blues. Lurie was my guitarist. So I spent a lot of time at their home and spent a lot of time with Carrie Bell, in addition to the other greats like Big Walter Horton, James Scott, and Junior Wells. But Willie not only was very fundamental in me learning and perfecting the art of blues harmonica, but he instilled in me the value of the blues and its effect on the world and its value to African Americans. The often quoted Willie Dixon quote, "The blues are the roots, everything else is the fruits. The blues are the facts of life." And so he instilled in me this great respect and appreciation for the blues, which has always been relegated to the backside or the back burner in terms of commercial exposure.
You and I were talking a little bit earlier, and one of the people you talked about as a big influence in your life was Little Walter. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about Little Walter. I remember, in my younger time listening to My Babe and Juke, I still have that album. So I know that you have some connect to Little Walter. How about sharing that?
Well, unfortunately, I didn't meet Little Walter. As I said, I returned to Chicago in '69. Little Walter died in '68. You got some affinity. You've recorded some of his music. Well, I understand you're doing some work with his daughters. Little Walter was the quintessential genius. I mean, he's the guy that used this distortion and feedback way before Hendrix and the Rockers as a recording and performing device, because it was said that when Juke came out, and Little Walter was the only chess record artist, blues artist, to have 2 number 1 hits. He eclipsed even Muddy Waters. Those 2 hits were Juke and My Baby. Juke, I think, was released in 1952. And it was said that when Juke came out, jazz musicians would gather around the jukebox trying to figure out what instrument he was playing, because it sounded nothing like a harmonica. And coincidentally, I shared that with my students today in our Blues in Schools class, the high school students, because it was just a completely different, unique, very dynamic sound. Little Walter was a genius. You listen to his solos, you listen to a song like Roller Coaster, he's playing bebop, man. He's playing bebop. And I have traveled the world, and I have heard people trying to play like Little Walter in the Andes Mountains of Ecuador. I've heard they have a Little Walter school in China. I kid you not. I've been there. And I would say that Little Walter, above all harmonica players of any genre, is the most influential.
Yeah.
Now, Stevie Wonder in the US, of course, is the most well-known, but then you had other harmonica players in other fields like Toots Thielemans in jazz, and I'm trying to think of my man, classical. I met him, and then, but Little
Charlie
Walter,
McCoy in country music.
Charlie McCoy in country. You had, I'm trying to think of the classical. I met him at a conference in Japan. Me and Lee Oscar introduced me to him. But you got Lee Oscar from War. But Little Walter, nobody has had such an effect of people trying to copy his style.
Well, Billy Branch, I think you're going to do some kind of Little Walter celebration on May 2nd. Is that happening?
Right. Because, see, our last album on Alligator was called Roots and Branches. Every song is a Little Walter song, but what we did, we interpreted about half somewhat true to the original, and then half we took liberties and we made it our own. And so
nice.
Even Juke is unrecognizable at first because it's got a different rhythm, but I'm playing the same solo as Little Walter throughout the song. And we are, as you mentioned, very good friends with Little Walter's daughter, Marion Diaz, who's named after her dad, Marion Walter Jacobs. And matter of fact, my wife is director of the Little Walter Foundation, and I'm on the board as well. And she's a sweetheart. And the foundation is to, spread the news about the genius and the influence of Little Walter, and also to provide educational resources for youngsters.
Billy, where is that event going to be held?
That's going to be at Fitzgerald's next Tuesday in Berwyn.
Yeah.
And we Blues Day Tuesday with our host, Tom Marker, who's been so kind to all of us blues folk here in Chicago. And we're going to celebrate Little Walter.
Right on. When I was getting ready to talk to you today, I think it was yesterday, I looked at a video of it was a news clip from the Quad Cities here in Illinois, Iowa too, I guess. But you were talking to a gym full of little kids, like 3rd, 4th grade, 2nd grade, and talking to blues. And the kids were jumping up and down. They were having a great time. So I was going to ask how you like those experiences. How do you like working with the kids and spreading the message about the blues?
I love it. Like I said, I've been doing it. My first Blues in Schools program was 1978. I have some of those former students who now have grandchildren come to my shows on occasion and will tell me, Mr. Branch, I still have my harmonica. And it is one of the most rewarding, fulfilling things that you could imagine, because the goal is not just to have the youngsters perform, which they do. They perform in cases like my current program. My whole band is involved. So some of the kids learn bass, some learn drums, piano, guitar, and of course they all have to learn some harmonica. But I have letters, I have stories that would probably bring tears to your eyes. Not just Black children, not just white children, but children of all ethnicities, of all walks of life. I've been in the deep South where down in Tennessee, and the guy says, "Well, I sure like my grandson used to fight every day, but he didn't fight one bit since he was in your class." And he didn't tell me his teacher was colored, but you know, but I've had the most rewarding, rich experiences. My dear departed mother used to say, when you get kind of down, she says, "Man, when you get down, you just look at those letters from those children over the years." And she was right, because they're very uplifting, very inspiring.
Well, Billy Branch, we're going to run out of time, but I'm going to fire one more question at you. There was a time when you had younger white kids like Corky Siegel and people like that playing with Muddy Waters, back in 1962. For a while, we saw that where there'd be white kids backing up older blues guys. And now I'm wondering if there's a shift going on, because you have like Freddie Dixon, who's the son of the guy you played with. Or no?
Well, Freddie was the original bass player in my band, the Sons of Blues. Everybody initially was a son of a famous blues man, except for me, but I came up with the name.
You're the guy.
Yeah,
because he plays with a kid named Michael Damiani, I think.
Right.
Yeah. Well, do you think the blues is coming back? You think more people are paying attention? There's festivals. There's a lot of stuff going on.
I think it is. I think there's a quiet resurgence. You got guys like Kingfish. You got people like John Tavius Willis. You got there's quite and I'm very uplifted by the fact that these young African American musicians are entering the fold, and they're good. And that hadn't happened before. There's quite a few. I'd say a couple of dozen at this point. Yeah, like you said, the young white kids, they were hip to it for decades. They got it, going back to Butterfield and so many more. And of course, across the pond, the British cats, they figured it out. They'd come over here and they'd talk about Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf. And the people were like, "Who the hell are you talking about?" And they couldn't believe it.
Well, hey, look, I'm so glad I got to meet you, even if it's via Zoom. I'm going to throw one last thing in here. I think Lynn Orman, who is a music producer for the show and a good friend of yours, she said that I think she threw in here that you're going to be at Rose's Jam at the Blues Festival, June 10th.
Yes.
Okay, well, I don't know if I'm going to get out to Fitzgerald's to see you on Tuesday, but I'm going to come see you on June 10th.
Yeah, we'll try to come to Fitzgerald, because I'll have my band on at the Roses thing. I'm jamming with Mary Lane and I think Willie Buck and a bunch of folks. But if you can, man, it'd be worthwhile. Try to make it.
All right, I'll give it a try. I'm an old guy. I'm starting to go out at night, though. It's getting warm.
Oh, man,
I'm ready.
Come on, you ain't that old. You're looking good. You look great. What you talking about? Just real quick, because the Blues Day Tuesday is also broadcast live the first hour on WDCB 90.9 FM from 7 to 8 p.m. So that Tom Marker is the host, and so the listeners can catch it.
Well, Billy Branch, I've known about you for a long time, and I'm really honored to meet you this way. And I'm looking forward to meet you out really up close. And
All right,
I wish you a lot of good luck.
All right, I appreciate it. I need it.
You're doing good. Okay, everybody, I want to thank all you people for listening in or for tuning in. I want to thank Billy Branch. I want to thank Mike Klonsky. I want to thank Hal James, the engineer, my sometimes co-hosts Katie Hogan and Tom Clark. And I want to encourage you all to keep doing good in the world, because the world needs all the good that Billy Branch does, that Michael James does, that all the people do together. All power to the people.
And that you do. Yes.
Right on. All power to the people.